stopped its development, and North Dakota will be mired in 8 or 9% unemployment. So get the regulations out of the way, get the tax incentives right, and you can get back to creating an amazing number of jobs very fast.
To my fellow questioners, our panelists tonight, my thanks. So ends this section of our conversation. The final bit of our debate from Tampa tonight coming up after this last break. Final section of our conversation tonight. We're back down to the 5 of us here on stage. I thought we'd talk a little bit more big picture. This has been called, in addition to this unprecedented primary contest the GOP is in the midst of, a battle for the soul of the Republican Party. Governor Romney, the question is about that soul. What have you done to further the cause of conservatism as a Republican leader?
Well, number one, I've raised a family, and with my wife, we've raised 5 wonderful sons, and we have 16 wonderful grandkids. Number two, I've worked in the private sector. The idea that somehow everything important for conservatism or for America happens in government is simply wrong. I've been in the private sector. I worked in one business that was in trouble and helped turn it around. Another I started, and as part of that, we were able to create thousands and thousands of jobs. And then I took an opportunity to become governor of a state that was slightly Democrat. About 85% of my legislature was Democrat, and I worked very hard to promote a conservative agenda. We cut taxes 19 times. We balanced the budget every year, put in place a rainy day fund of over $2 billion by the time I left. We were also successful in having English immersion in our schools, driving our schools to be #1 in the nation. That kind of a conservative model in a state like Massachusetts was a model in many respects that other states could look at and say, okay, conservative principles work. We were able to reach across the aisle to fight for conservative principles, and now I'm taking that to a presidential campaign, wrote a book about those principles that lay out why I believe they're right for America.
Mr. Speaker, you've been talking a lot about conservative principles in this campaign so far. Is that enough for you? Is that good enough?
Look, I don't want to spend my time commenting on Mitt. I'd like to just tell you that I went to a Goldwater organizing session in 1964. I met with Ronald Reagan for the first time in 1974. I worked with Jack Kemp and Art Laffer and others to develop supply-side economics in the late 70s. I helped Governor Reagan become President Reagan. I helped pass the Reagan economic program, and I worked with the National Security Council on issues involving the collapse of the Soviet Empire. I then came back, organized a group called GOPAC, spent 16 years building a majority in the House for the first time since 1954, the first re-elected majority since 1928, developed the Conservative Opportunity Society, talked about big ideas, big solutions. So I think it's fair to say I've spent most of my lifetime trying to develop a conservative movement across this country that relates directly to what we have to do. And I think only a genuine conservative who's in a position to debate Obama and to show how wide the gap is between Obama's policies and conservatism can in fact win, because he's going to spend $1 billion trying to smear whoever the nominee is, and we better be prepared to beat him in the debate and prove exactly how wrong his values are and how wrong his practices are.
Which, Senator Santorum, gets us back to electability, the gap between the Republican Party and the president. Some of the newspaper headlines about this gathering we were going to have tonight. In Florida, Romney seeks to link Gingrich to foreclosure crisis. And here's a second one. The verdict is in. Mitt Romney's Bain Capital problem is real. What's the net effect of all this, of the tax release tomorrow, of the Freddie Mac release tonight, on your party, say your candidacy as you try to go forward?
Well, I would say that there are more fundamental issues than that, where there's a gap and a problem with the two of the gentlemen who are up here with me. And one is on the biggest issue that we have to deal with in this election that's crushing the economy, will crush it even further, and crush freedom, and that's Obamacare. Governor Romney's plan in Massachusetts was the basis for Obamacare. Speaker Gingrich, for 20 years, supported a federal individual mandate, something that Pam Bondi is now going to the Supreme Court saying is unconstitutional. Speaker Gingrich, for 20 years, up until last year, supported an individual mandate, which is at the core of Obamacare. If you look at cap and trade, Governor Romney was very proud to say that he was the first state in the country as governor to sign a cap on CO2 emissions. The first state in the country to put a cap. believing in the global warming and criticized Republicans for not believing in it, as did, by the way, Speaker Gingrich, who was for a cap-and-trade program with incentives, business incentive, but was for the rubric of cap-and-trade, not specifically the cap-and-trade bill that was out there. Again, huge, huge differences between my position and where President Obama is, but not so on two major issues. You go down and you look at the Wall Street bailouts I said before. Here's one where you have folks who preach conservatism, private sector, and when push came to shove, they got pushed. They didn't stand tall for the conservative principles that they argued that they were for, and as a result, we ended up with this bailout that has injected government into business like it had never been done before. They rejected conservatism when it was hard to stand. It's going to be hard to stand, whoever this president's going to be elected. It's going to be tough. There's going to be a mountain of problems. It's going to be easy to be able to bail out and compromise your principles. We have gentlemen here on the three issues that got the Tea Party started, that are the base of the conservative movement now in the Republican Party. And there is no difference between President Obama and these two gentlemen, and that's why this election here in Florida is so critical, that we have someone that actually can create a contrast between the president and the conservative point of view.
Congressman Paul, are these two men in the middle insufficiently conservative for you?
Well, I think that the problem is nobody's defined what being conservative means.
Go ahead.
And I think that is our problem. Conservatives means we have smaller government and more liberty. And yet, if you ask what have we done, I think we've lost our way completely. Our rhetoric is still pretty good, but when we get in charge, we expand the government. You talk about Dodd-Frank, but we gave him Sarbanes-Oxley. We gave debts as well, you know, when we're in charge. So if it means limited government, you have to ask a basic question: what should the role of government be? The founders asked that question, had a revolution, wrote a constitution, and they said the role of government ought to be to protect liberty. It's not to run a welfare state and not to be the policeman of the world. And so if you're going to conservative, how can you be conservative and cut food stamps, but you won't cut spending overseas? There's not a nickel or penny that anybody will cut on the conservative side overseas spending, and we don't have the money. They're willing to start more wars. So I say if you're conservative, you want small government across the board, especially in personal liberty. What's wrong with having the government out of our personal lives? So this is what we have to decide: what conservative means, what limited government means. And I have a simple suggestion. We have a pretty good guide, and if we follow the Constitution, government would be very small, and we would all be devoted conservatives.
Governor Romney again tonight. So-called Romney Care and so-called Obamacare have been positioned very closely side by side by your opponent, the senator, and again, you've been called insufficiently conservative.
You know, I have a record. You can look at my record. I just described what I had accomplished in Massachusetts. It's a conservative record. I also had the fun of running against Ted Kennedy. What a great thrill that was. I didn't beat him, but he had to take a mortgage out on his house to make sure that he could defeat me. I believe that the policies that he put in place had hurt America and helped create a permanent underclass in this country. My health care plan, by the way, is one that under our Constitution we're allowed to have. The people in our state chose a plan which I think is working for our state. At the time we crafted it, I was asked time and again, is this something that you would have the federal government do? I said, absolutely not. I do not support a federal mandate. I do not support a federal one-size-fits-all plan. I believe in the Constitution. That's why the Attorney General here is saying, absolutely not. You can't impose Obamacare on the states. What I will do if I'm president, I will repeal Obamacare and return to the states the authority and the rights the states have to craft their own programs to care for their own poor.
Speaker Gingrich, I know none of you believe in polls, but as we came in here tonight, of the numbers in the known world, your numbers were on the rise. What scares you about the presidency if you made it to the job you want?
I actually agree with what Rick Santorum said. I believe that whoever the next president is, if we're going to get America back on the right track, is going to face enormous, difficult problems, some of which have been accurately diagnosed by Dr. Paul. And the fact is that we have tremendous institutional biases against doing the right thing and against getting things done. And we have huge interest groups who would rather preside over the wreckage than lose their favored position by helping the country. So I always tell audiences, I never ask anyone to be for me, because if they're for me, they vote yes, go home and say, I sure hope Newt does it. I ask people to be with me because I think this will be a very hard, very difficult journey, and I find it a very humbling and a very sobering thought that one would have to try to get America back on the right track, despite all of our elites and all of our entrenched bureaucracies.
Governor Romney, you talk about restoring America's greatness. Given that, in your view, when was America last great?
America still is great, but we have a lot of people suffering. We have people that are underemployed that shouldn't be, unemployed that shouldn't be. Home values continue to go down. We have the median income in this country has declined 10% in the last 4 years. We're still a great nation, but a great nation doesn't have so many people suffering. And I'm running in part because I have experience in how the economy works. And I want to use that experience to get people working again, to get our economy working again. And the idea to get our economy working is not to have the government play a more intrusive role in how our economy works, but instead to do the 7 things that always get an economy going. Get taxes competitive, regulation as modest as possible and modernized, get ourselves energy independent, open up trade with other nations and crack down on cheaters, make sure we don't have crony capitalism, that's what we have going on right now, build human capital through education, and also finally balance the budget. People will not invest in an economy and create new jobs if they think we're going to hit a grease-like wall. I will do those 7 things and get America working again.
I want to thank all of our candidates and our hosts, of course, here at the University of South Florida. We are obligated at this point to say, go Bulls, for our hosts here, for our viewers here on your NBC station. Our coverage will continue. I'll be back with you shortly, but for now, let's go over to David Gregory to take a look at part of what transpired here on stage tonight with our thanks to you all. Thank you very much.
And Brian, thank you very much. I'm David Gregory here in the spin room with my colleagues, Chuck Todd, our political director, Andrew Mitchell, our chief foreign correspondent, veterans of campaigns past, both. Chuck, let me start with you. The dynamic here was about Mitt Romney going on the offensive against Newt Gingrich. How did it play?
Well, and I think what he was also hoping for was to get under Gingrich's skin. And that, I think their people are going to be happy that they felt like they got their hits in. But boy, did Gingrich decide to play the, hey, I'm the front runner. I don't need to respond. I'm going to be above it all. What struck me is what a marked contrast, frankly, to Gingrich's speech Saturday night, his, quote, victory speech, which had a lot of venom in it. Boy, it's almost as if somebody got to him and said, you know what, don't do that. You can't do that anymore if you want to be the front runner.
This is Florida, a more diverse state, a lot of independent voters here, Andrea. Newt Gingrich sounded like he was playing more to the middle. Here was one exchange early on that gives you a sense of that dynamic. Romney on the offense, Newt dusting it off, not really letting it get to him. Watch.
I think it's about leadership, and the Speaker was given an opportunity to be the leader of our party in 1994, and at the end of 4 years, he had to resign in disgrace. Now, in the 1970s, he came to Washington. I went to work in my first job in the 1970s at the bottom level of a consulting firm. In the 1990s, he had to resign in disgrace from this job as Speaker. I had the opportunity to go off and run the Olympic Winter Games.
Well, look, I'm not going to spend the evening trying to chase Governor Romney's misinformation. We'll have a site at newt.org by tomorrow morning. We'll list everything. He just said at least 4 things that are false. I don't want to waste the time on him.
He did not rise to the bait. In fact, Mitt Romney called him an influence peddler and wouldn't back down from calling him a lobbyist, even though Newt Gingrich had put out the contract with Freddie Mac just before the debate started. He pointed out, Mitt Romney did, that Gingrich reported to the chief lobbyist for Freddie Mac. Newt Gingrich has decided in this state, right now at least, the tactic is to be presidential and to try to prove to party leaders and to voters that he can be thought of as the nominee.
Well, and it's interesting, the roles were reversed here, Chuck. Listen, it was tonight Mitt Romney saying, I wanted to be more positive, but I had all that incoming in South Carolina. I had to really answer back. He's made that pivot now, but Newt Gingrich is saying, wow, this is a desperate campaign.
It is, and that's what, and it'll be interesting to see how the Romney people handle that. Now, the other issue, of course, that Gingrich has is he doesn't have a lot of money right now. He's hoping to get some of his super PACs, and maybe the super PAC is going to get some money. There's some reports that it's been sort of replenished by his one family donor out there in Las Vegas. But this decision to do this, can he keep it up? Remember, the big criticism of Gingrich the first time he rose is that he couldn't sort of handle being the front runner, and he couldn't keep himself in check when attacked. But he did here. I mean, even Ron Paul went after him. He got ganged up on at a couple points, and boy, he just sort of set back.
Santorum went after him after both of them. And, you know,
particularly at the end there.
Exactly. And I talked to a top Romney advisor tonight who said, look, if Mitt Romney cannot win here in Florida, then we're going to have to try to reinvent the smoke-filled room, which has been democratized.